This is a short video from the ONS looking at the balance of payments, where we will focus on the current account balance. For a transcript, email info@ons.gov.uk. So firstly, what is the balance of payments? Well, basically it measures economic transactions between the UK and the rest of the world. It is split into different accounts, with the most well-known being the current account. This records trade in both goods and services, which is when we buy from and sell to the rest of the world. For example, importing oil and exporting telecommunication services. It also records income received from and paid to non-residents. Most income comes from investments abroad, but a smaller amount also comes from employment. This is where a person is resident in one country but works in another. Finally, it includes transfers of money. An example of this is when households send money to family abroad, or even when governments receive and give aid. There are also the capital account and financial account, which record the changing pattern of international assets. In this video, we will focus our attention on the UK current account. So how's the current account constructed? Well, if we bring up this map of the UK, firstly we have goods and services that leave the UK, for example exporting cars across the world. There is also money that comes into the UK, for example when organisations and individuals receive income from investments in other countries, or when grant aid is received, for example the EU Social Fund. Both of these together act as a credit to the UK current account. We also have goods and services that we import from abroad, as well as money that leaves the UK. For example, when non-residents earn income from their investments here in the UK, or when the UK government makes payments to the EU. These together act as a debit to the current account. If we take credits minus debits, we get the current account balance. So if we bring up this chart, we will look at the amount of credits and debits in billions since 1955. Note that these are not adjusted for increasing prices, known as inflation. Here is the line for credits to the UK current account, and here is the line for debits, and they both follow a pretty similar pattern. Looking at this part of the chart, from around 1955 to the early 1970s, there was very little change in transactions, and they were also relatively small. Then over the next 35 years or so, they increased rapidly, mainly due to the globalization of the world economies, in which transactions became more common. Looking towards the end of the chart here, due to the onset of the financial crisis across the world in 2008, we can see that both credits and debits fell, as transactions between countries fell. In the latest year, 2010, we can see that the gap between credits and debits widened. The difference between the credits and debits lines here give us the current account balance. To see that, we will now use this chart, which shows the balance in billions over the same period, where the balance is calculated as credits minus debits. The thick line here shows a balance of 0, which means credits are the same as debits. If the current account balance is above the black line, then we can say that the UK has a current account surplus. That is, the UK has more credits than debits. If the current account balance is below the black line, then the UK has a current account deficit. That is, the UK has more debits than credits. Here we will now plot the balance since 1955. For 25 years or so, we can see the balance hovered around 0, with a small surplus in the early 1980s. From around 1983 onwards, there are 3 distinct phases, which you can see here. Looking at the most recent annual data available in 2010, we can see that the current account in the UK balance of payments had a deficit of 48.6 billion, the largest since records began. This is equivalent to around 3.3% of GDP, where GDP measures the value of all the goods and services that's produced within the UK. Finally, we will look at the different components within the current account that make up the deficit of 48.6 billion, using this chart. Note we showed earlier the current account is made up of 4 parts, which are goods, services, income and current transfers. Here is the overall deficit, which stood at 48.6 billion in 2010. Now using these bars, we can show the different contributions. We can see that the main driver of the deficit is goods, where the UK imported 98.5 billion more goods than it exported in 2010. There was also a negative contribution to the current account balance from current transfers, where the UK paid 20.4 billion more than it received. These two negatives were partially offset by a surplus in services, in which the UK exported 61.8 billion more in services to the rest of the world than it imported. Income also provided a positive contribution to the current account balance, where UK residents received 8.6 billion more in income from abroad the non-UK residents received from the UK.